The sky above the desert base was clear until it wasn't. Deafening roar cracked through the silence as precision-guided munitions rained down on the American military installation. Dust and fire consumed the horizon, and within moments the world had changed. This wasn't just an attack. It was a message, a defiance, a declaration. Iran had struck, and Washington wasn't ready. All intelligence reports had signaled tension, but none predicted the audacity of a direct strike. Cameras caught the flames rising, the sirens wailing, and the chaos erupting. The images that emerged within the first 5 minutes paint a grim reality. This was not a warning shot. It was war knocking on America's front door in the Middle East. Inside the Pentagon, phones rang off the hook. Defense Secretary voices cracked with urgency. Surveillance footage from Sinteam came through. Thermal visuals showed secondary explosions, injured soldiers being dragged to safety, and a plume of black smoke rising so high it was visible from space. Iran had hit a major logistics hub, and the implications went far beyond one night of fire. In Tehran, the strike was no accident. It had been maybe years in the making. Iranian Revolutionary Guard officials met in silence hours before the launch, their eyes hard with resolve. Their patience had run out. Retaliation for years of sabotage, assassinations, economic strangulation, and military encirclement had finally found form. And that form came as a barrage of ballistic missiles that pierced American air defenses, like they weren't even there. But why now? That question echoed across CN, Al Jazeera, Fox News, RT, and every defense ministry in the region. Just days earlier, American special forces had allegedly conducted a covert raid on Iranian soil targeting a nuclear convoy. Tehran didn't confirm it, but the response tonight made it clear. The red line had been crossed. This was not politics anymore. This was personal. The attack wasn't just a show of strength. It was strategic. The base was a known coordination point for drone warfare operations and surveillance over Iranian airspace. Destroying it crippled a key node of US intelligence gathering. Iran didn't stop there. Within minutes, cyber attacks targeted communication systems, forcing American personnel to switch to emergency protocols. Chaos was spreading, just on the battlefield, but across networks and mines. In Israel, sirens blared. In Saudi Arabia, military aircraft scrambled. Across the Gulf, oil terminals locked down. The world was bracing for the next blow. Markets plummeted. Gold surged. The Strait of Hormuz, lifeline of global oil transport, faced imminent closure. Energy traders panicked as Iran's naval command announced a defensive lockdown in its waters. A third of the world's oil trade suddenly sat on the brink of suspension. And yet, as the night raged on, Washington's response was uncharacteristically delayed. President's advisors debated the scale of the counterattack. Would a full military response ignite a regional war? Could restraint be misread as weakness? Behind closed doors, the debate was as volatile as the battlefield. Hawks demanded missile strikes on Iranian command centers. Diplomats urged a pause. Generals readied plans titled Operation Iron Echo, designed to destroy Iran's launch capabilities within an hour. Meanwhile, on the ground, American troops huddled in bunkers, not knowing if more missiles were coming. Medics raced to treat burns and blunt force trauma. Drones hovered overhead, scanning the horizon for further threats. Everyone knew this wasn't over. It had just begun. Movement. Iranian state TV broadcast footage of the missiles being launched, crowds in the streets cheering, commanders receiving salutes. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei addressed the nation, calling the strike a divine response to American aggression. It wasn't just theater. It wasn't psychological warfare. Every word was measured to inflame and provoke, but not everyone in Iran celebrated. In quiet corners of Shiraz and Isfahan, families lit candles for the war they knew was coming. Mothers whispered prayers for sons who might now be called to the front lines. Old veterans remembered the Iraq War and feared something worse was on the horizon. The streets buzzed with nationalism, but beneath it was a current of fear. In Washington, international calls lit up the switchboards. NATO convened an emergency session. Russia issued a statement blaming US provocations. China called for de-escalation and mutual respect. France and Germany pushed for diplomatic intervention. For the US and Iran, the moment for dialogue had long passed. American carriers in the Arabian Sea changed course. Strike groups prepared to move closer to Iranian waters. Satellites tracked troop movements in western Iran. The world watched with bated breath as a massive military buildup unfolded in real time. Back at the scene of the strike, journalists embedded with US forces filmed the devastation. Hangars collapsed, vehicles overturned, craters the size of swimming pools. And in those images, one thing was clear. Iran had just changed the rules of engagement. This wasn't about sanctions anymore. This wasn't about covered ops, deniable assassinations, or cyber sabotage. This was open warfare, undeniable and direct. But Iran hadn't just hit America militarily. They had struck a blow to US perception of invincibility. For decades, American bases in the Middle East were seen as impenetrable. Tonight, that illusion lay in burning rubble. And as dawn broke over the Gulf, a second wave of sirens began. A drone swarm, possibly Iranian, buzzed into restricted airspace. Anti-air systems activated. Soldiers dove for cover again. This was not over. It might never be. The attack united America's fractured political elite, if only for a moment. Senators who hadn't agreed on anything in months lined up for press conferences demanding retaliation. A bipartisan resolution called the attack an act of war. The defense secretary stood grim, faced beside the Joint Chiefs, and declared, "We will respond decisively and without hesitation." But what would decisive look like? Another targeted strike, or a full-scale war that would consume the region and drag in powers like Russia and China? The question haunted every intelligence analyst. Iran knew that America would strike back, but it had calculated that a single punch, if bold enough, could shift the regional balance. It wanted to show strength, to force Washington to reconsider its constant pressure. It wasn't just about hitting back. It was about resetting the board. America's next move could shatter that illusion. Within hours, B-2 bombers were fueled. Submarines surfaced. Tomahawk missiles were programmed. Bases across Europe went on high alert. American civilians were warned to avoid travel to the Middle East. The US issued a 48-hour ultimatum to Iran: stand down or face full retaliation. Tehran responded with defiance. "We are not afraid of war," declared the foreign minister. "We are prepared for all consequences." Iranian proxies in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon began mobilizing. Hezbollah issued a statement saying any American response would ignite a fire that consumes the Zionist entity and its American backers. The region teetered on the edge. Yet amid the threats, some voices, rare and faint, called for diplomacy. Envoys scrambled to broker back-channel talks. Oman offered to mediate. Qatar opened emergency lines of communication, but trust was broken and the path to peace seemed buried under the rubble of the American base. And so the world waits for the next missile, for the next speech, for the next mistake that might ignite a global war. From Washington to Tel Aviv, from Riyadh to Moscow, questions surged through intelligence halls, newsrooms, and war rooms. What is Iran's real endgame? For years, Iran had played the long game, cultivating proxies, building asymmetric warfare capabilities, and enduring waves of economic and cyber warfare from Western powers. But this was something different. A direct strike on a US. A base meant Iran was stepping out from behind the shadow of proxy war and into a frontal confrontation. It was a radical shift from the doctrine of ambiguity. The Islamic Republic wasn't hiding anymore. Inside Iran, analysts spoke in guarded tones. On one hand, this move was a show of defiance rooted in survival. On the other, it was an admission that patience had run dry. They believed the West only respected power, so power had to be shown. The strike was designed to change the psychological dynamic. Iran was no longer the hunted, it had become the hunter. Across the border, Iraq trembled. The US base that was a hit had functioned as a central coordination point between American and Iraqi forces. Now, Iraqi politicians were divided. Some condemned Iran's action for risking their sovereignty. Others blamed the US presence for drawing fire. Protesters poured into Baghdad streets chanting both anti-American, anti-Iranian slogans. Chaos grew like cracks in glass, visible, spreading, and impossible to contain. In Washington's Situation Room, the mood had turned from shock to fury. Intelligence briefings showed that the attack was not just military, but symbolic. The timing, the location, and the payload were all calculated to test America's limits. But worse, there was chatter that more was coming. Interception of encrypted communications indicated a coordinated plan involving other Iran-backed groups in the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, even factions in Syria were reportedly mobilizing. It wasn't just Iran that was stepping forward. It was an entire network, a shadow army spanning 4 countries. This was no longer a single strike. It was the beginning of something far larger. Satellite images showed Iranian missile batteries repositioning. American recon drones spotted Iranian warships leaving port. One vessel, an advanced Jamaran-class destroyer, positioned just inside the Strait of Hormuz, an unmistakable threat to oil routes. Naval command in Bahrain raised alert levels to DEFCON 2. War was not just looming. It was assembling piece by across the chessboard of the Middle East. The President of the United States finally addressed the nation. He spoke slowly, with resolve, as millions held their breath. Let me be clear. An attack on our forces is an attack on our nation. We will not allow this aggression to go unanswered. We do not seek war, but we will not run from it. His words echoed across news outlets, social media, and military outposts. Yet, behind the controlled tone, a storm was brewing. Cabinet meetings turned into crisis sessions. War games were simulated. Allies were called. NATO's Article 5 was discussed, though no consensus was reached. Most European allies feared escalation, even as they condemned Iran's actions. Back in Tehran, the leadership didn't flinch. They had already moved underground. Reports confirmed that top IRGC generals had relocated to secure bunkers. Anti-air batteries surrounded critical infrastructure. Civilians began hoarding food. Hospitals increased emergency stockpiles. Iran wasn't preparing for diplomacy. It was preparing for siege, and in the darkness of strategy rooms, a terrifying realization dawned on both sides. Neither Iran nor the United States had a clear exit strategy. Both had red lines, both had pride, both had firepower, but neither had a path out that didn't lead through fire. Israel wasted no time. It launched preemptive strikes in southern Syria, claiming Iranian missile buildups threatened its security. The skies over Damascus lit up as air defenses engaged. Russia, whose troops sat only miles away, issued sharp warnings but did not intervene. The powder keg was open, and everyone was lighting matches. The oil markets convulsed, price surged 120 a barrel. Asian and European economies teetered. Airlines routed flights away from the Middle East. Multinational corporations triggered emergency evacuation plans for personnel in the region. Insurance rates for shipping through the Persian Gulf doubled in a day. The economic fallout had begun. Meanwhile, in the heart of the United States, something stirred that hadn't in years. Fear of another long war, fear of retaliation on US soil. Major cities went on alert. Airports tightened security. The FBI and Homeland Security increased surveillance of suspected foreign agents. False alarms flooded 911 systems as Americans braced for the unknown. Iranian media ran continuous footage of the strike's aftermath, overlaid with patriotic music and Quranic verses. The message was clear: Iran had defied the great Satan. They called it a divine victory. But internally, there was tension. The leadership knew the price of open war with the US could be existential. Yet, stepping back now, after striking first, could unravel everything. Tehran's gamble had no safety net. Back at the base, clean-up crews dug through debris. Forensics teams gathered fragments of missile casings. Analysts confirmed the weaponry used was from Iran's fated 110 series, short-range but devastatingly accurate. There were casualties. 12 American service members injured, 3 confirmed dead. The names hadn't been released yet. Their loss would become the rallying cry for the American response, every channel prepared for the next move. Would the US launch immediate retaliatory strikes? Would it hit Iran's command structure directly, risking full-scale war? Or would it opt for cyberwarfare, sanctions, and psychological operations, fighting a shadow war to avoid apocalypse? Yet even as those questions dominated headlines, another battlefield began to emerge. Social media, disinformation campaigns surged. Fake videos, AI-generated images, and deepfakes flooded timelines. Iranian and American bots clashed in comment sections. The war wasn't just for territory anymore. It was for hearts, minds, and narrative. And in that digital chaos, a chilling trend emerging. The public wasn't just afraid. They were angry. They were polarized. They were ready to believe anything that confirmed their bias. Truth became a casualty. Reality splintered. Then came the second shockwave. Convoy of American military vehicles was ambushed in northern Iraq by an Iran-backed militia. Rocket-propelled grenades aids small arms fire. 4 more US soldiers killed, several wounded. The footage spread fast. Blood on the sand, screams in the smoke. The strike on the base was not an isolated event. It was the opening act of a wider campaign. Iran was signaling it had reach, not just through missiles, but through men, through networks, through ideologies. This was not a conventional war. This was hybrid warfare at its peak. And it had already begun. And as the sun set once more over a region now bracing for the worst, one truth echoed louder than missiles, louder than politics, louder than fear. What began with a single strike would end only when the world itself chose between total war or the courage to pull back from the edge.